being really good at your job and showing that visibly is part of what makes other people trust you. And part of that is talking about one's competence. So it's being overly communicative about what you are doing. So thanks so much for the report, Karina. I'm going to get back to you by tomorrow. I'm going to loop in this person. Signposting our actions and what we're doing gives the other person a sense of like release and calm.
You're listening to HR Superstars, a podcast brought to you by 15Five. On this show, we talk to strategic people leaders who are making a meaningful impact in their organizations and shaping the future of work. So get ready to be inspired and discover the secrets behind building high-performing teams and fostering a culture of growth and thriving. The future of HR starts here. Welcome, everyone. It is so nice to see you all. Really happy to have you here today. I'm Karina Young, the VP of People at 15Five. And what I've been thinking about a lot is this kind of seasonal transition moment that we're in. Every time we're right in between that crux of one season and another, I think about opportunity. And especially there's something about between summer to fall that always feels like a moment for change, a moment of reflecting on what do we want to do differently for ourselves and our life. And that has made me think a lot about, obviously what we do in the people world and HR leaders and how we think about our influence and our confidence. Because for many of us, we carry an enormous responsibility in our organizations without always the influence to match it. We are driving many outcomes that shape our businesses: retention, performance, culture, engagement. But in high stakes moments, it's very easy to feel like our voices don't carry the same weight as other leaders. And that dynamic can start to really chip away at our confidence and lead us to habits that make us think that we need to make our requests more palatable, more soft, more kind to people, but not realizing that those habits are also making our voices sound less important, less urgent, and ultimately less strategic to our peers. And so we find ourselves softening a message, downplaying our wins, or just holding back until someone gives us permission to actually step into own what we have done and what we're driving. But today, when I think about opportunity and change, that is the script I want us to flip. We are joined by someone who has helped so many professionals, from emerging managers to C-suite leaders, shift the way that they communicate, and in doing so, really shift the way that they're seen. Dr. Kate Mason, who's here with us today, is a communications coach, world champion debater, author of the brand new book, Powerfully Likable. She's also a former colleague of mine that I am just thrilled to have on this show and be able to reconnect with today. And she's going to help us explore communication habits that build influence, earn trust, and create lasting change. I'm going to welcome Kate. Kate, it is so nice to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, Karina. It's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm so excited to engage with all of you.
Kate, give us like the movie trailer version of your life and your journey and what took you to where you are today.
I am someone who has spent pretty much my whole life thinking about communication. I started debating, which is, I know, a very nerdy thing to admit in public, but it was what I absolutely adored and still love. I started when I was about 10 and have really consistently thought about how do you most effectively structure and strategize and prepare to get the best amount of cut through and influence in a conversation or a presentation that you can. And I think about that in all of the different levers that we have at our disposal, whether it's our physical presentation, our language, and the way we structure our speech. And so it's been a very big part of my life. In my work today, I spent a long time working in tech companies alongside your good self and elsewhere. And I worked with extremely effective and not so effective communicators. And part of my job was to help them amplify or turn the volume up on what they were saying and how they were saying it, such that they could convince stakeholders, be they press or investors or clients, right, on all of our different jobs. And I think particularly relevant for today's conversation, oftentimes most of your convincing is your internal stakeholders, right? How do I influence, often without authority or without as much authority as I would like, to get the thing that I really believe in and to create? So the book is really a result of all of my work with those types of executives, trying to bring out some of the patterns that I've seen and a toolkit through which you can help yourselves to communicate better.
Tell me, you've obviously spent your career, a lot of it within internal conversations, partnering with leaders. there's a lot of similarities between HR and the communications world, especially in just being brought into the conversation too late. We are sometimes the last to find out, but the first that needs to get something important done. How have you seen that play out? And what's your advice for HR leaders who want to shift from being reactive to a more proactive influence?
Oh my gosh, such a wonderful question. I think I often really resist when I hear things described as, oh, they've got a PR problem or they've got an HR problem. I'm like, no, you have a fundamental company problem. And we are the ones who are sort of being handed it, as you say, in the aftermath. It's oftentimes the order of operations, I think, is quite wrong, right? We're not brought in early enough, as you say. How to shift that is all about trust building. And we know this intuitively, but so much of our trust building actually comes from our communication. How are we positioning ourselves? How are we showing up for ourselves in a way that tells people we are safe hands? Throw us a gnarly question or a difficult problem, and we will catch it and we will make it better. And that's often our function, is to try to make sure that we're instilling that trust with people by the way in which we're showing up in our presence or in our language.
I love that. So yeah, thinking about trust as a way to, move to that proactive place where people then start to come to you in the right time. I think one thing we hear from a lot of leaders is that there's a constant state of friction too with HR and other executives of like, I don't even know how to build trust because they might not even think I'm valuable. They might think that I'm just like your task person in the organization. I'm just curious to hear your reactions or some of the ways you've seen that play out with the folks you've worked with.
Yeah, it's a wonderful one. So one of the ways in which we demonstrate trust is to demonstrate a couple of things at the same time. So we demonstrate our competence, or ideally our excellence, right? Being really good at your job and showing that visibly is part of what makes other people trust you. They think, oh, great, Karina's got this. If I give her something difficult, I trust that she will be able to deliver it back to me. And part of that is talking about one's competence, which sounds weird. It's like this meta job we have to do. So it's being overly communicative about what you are doing. So thanks so much for the report, Karina. I'm going to get back to you by tomorrow. I'm going to loop in this person. Signposting our actions and what we're doing gives the other person a sense of like release and calm. So you think about when you're on a long road trip and you see those road signs, 20 miles to Lake Tahoe or 10 miles to Lake Tahoe. There's a sense of calmness we get when we understand where I am in relation to the thing that I want. And I really encourage folks, think of signposting your conversations or your interactions in a similar way, right? I'm going to have that to you by Thursday, and on Friday, I'm going to put some time in for us to meet again and talk about it. That's a pithy example, but it's a telling example in terms of signposting our competence and our communication makes it visible and makes other people understand where we are on that map.
Yeah, that's such an excellent tip and way to think about it, because we spend a lot of time in HR helping other people build trust with one another, right? Particularly leaders and their directs. And we know it's not something that happens over the night. It's actually the small moments that end up leading to that trust being built. And I think it's not even pithy example, but just to like, I'm going to do this thing. This is when you'll have it. This is when we're going to meet about it. Keeping those lines of communication open so there is no guessing. Because one thing we actually talk a lot about at 15.5 is the stories people create in their own minds when they lack the information of, I asked Kate for this thing. She said she'd do it. It's been 4 days. I don't know anything. She must have totally dropped it. She must not care about this. She must be that could be a story someone creates. It could totally not be, but now you've just left it to their own interpretation instead of taking hold of that story.
And oftentimes that story, I love this idea, but oftentimes that story becomes Kate is bad at her job, right? We wholesale, we extrapolate to this kind of extreme degree. And it's like, well, is Kate bad at her job, or did she just not tell you about that meeting, right? Like there's a lot of places we have to go on that continuum, but oftentimes we do go to that end point, which, as you say, is a damaging sort of a slippery slope for people. So being able to ratchet that back and say, wait, I'm communicating as I go is a really helpful tool. Yeah.
Oh yeah, especially in high pressure environments, right? The quickness in which someone will extrapolate to the most extreme negative critique of you is very fast.
Super fast.
Because whatever they're dealing with or managing, the urgency is just putting that pressure on.
Yes, absolutely. And a great example, sometimes your intention is really good. So I had someone working for me way back when I was still in house, and I would often move the time of our one-on-one. We had a one-on-one standing meeting on a Monday, very chaotic and a lot of, catch up to do. And I would often move the time around. I'm like, oh gosh, I'm not going to be able to give her my attention right now, or the CEO's called me in to do something. And she, months into working together, said to me, Kate, when you move the time around on me, it makes me feel like I'm not important. And I was so shocked because I had been dutifully moving the time around to try and be more present, to try and be more available. Right. And so we both had this explanation on each other's side. And so we literally moved our standing one-on-one to a Tuesday where I knew I wouldn't be as chaotic and I knew it would always be, but for a big emergency, be at the same time. So it's a really subtle thing like that. Here was I thinking I was doing the right thing by her. And in fact, she was receiving it in the very opposite way. So communication is so foundational to all these little micro moments that happen in our workday.
Oh, exactly. And one thing I think about a lot, Kate, for our HR community is I think also too, just like the number of women in the world of HR, right? Like we make up a majority of the roles within the HR community. I'm going to maybe misquote the statistic, but I feel about 70% good on it. I think women in HR are about 70% of the roles. But as we get further and further up in levels, closer to the C-suite, that percent diminishes dramatically. And I'm just curious for you because so much of your book too, I mean, I think these tips are great for anyone, but there's also a taken perspective there for women in particular. And so what do you think women really struggle with when it comes to power in their roles and feeling powerful in their communication?
Yeah, I think a lot of us don't naturally resonate with the word power. I have brilliant, ambitious, interesting, credentialed women that I coach. And a lot of them will say to me, oh, I don't really identify as powerful. Like, that's probably not who I am. What I'm seeking to do with this book, Powerfully Likable, right? Bringing two different aspects together, is can we give ourselves better language? And I mean ourselves like each individual one of us. What is my own language for my way of leading? And how does that showcase the best of me? Now, I know that sounds pat, but what I mean by that is where do I currently already shine? How can I optimize to give myself more opportunities to do that or to show that? And then where are my deficits? Where am I not showing up in exactly the way I would like? And what are some really practical tools for me to be able to do that? And that's part of having that language means that we're able to summon that self, that aspirational, like, oh, yes, that's who I see myself as in those tougher moments, which is a very helpful shortcut.
Do you find that for the women you coach, I guess, like, what is that journey from where they are today to their aspiration to getting there? Like, how does that journey feel more unique for women that you coach?
I mean, it's honestly as different as there are women in the world, right?
Yeah.
Like, I wish there was a simple way to do it. But part of what makes it interesting for me is that everyone's very different. Sometimes it's as simple as I have one wonderful person I'm working with at the moment, and she said, I just get paralyzed when I have to present, and my seniority level means that I'm presenting more and more. So we've done a lot of work on her breathing to just regulate her own breathing. So this is over a period of time, such that she can literally catch her breath properly when she's presenting. One of the things I noticed when she was doing it to me, I was like, oh, you're not even giving yourself enough oxygen. So it's very much for her grounded in her physicality. Other people are like, I get caught off when I'm asked something out of the blue, right? And I'm now in a role where I'm getting all these questions coming in at me and I'm not always expecting them or I'm not always prepared. So we work on frameworks for preparation or more lightweight ways of getting up to speed on things. So it's a really broad gamut of ideas and things that I work on with folks. And it can range, as I say, everything from the body to the structure to the actual verbiage that you're using.
Yeah, that's interesting. The example you give on breathing resonates a lot with me. And one thing I'm very grateful for being at home on Zoom for is also like, I find that I can regulate my breathing more if I can fidget with something. Like when I'm in those meetings to be able to remind myself, you do need to breathe. But it is interesting how that can happen where you're in an important meeting and you feel so good and confident, but all of a sudden you go to speak and it's like, and I'm talking so fast and I can't breathe and I just like don't know how to catch myself without sounding psychotic. And it's just like the reel starts going in your mind that can just push those habits further and further.
Yes. I talk about sometimes it's a fidget, sometimes it's doing something that would regulate you beforehand, like singing, yoga, lifting weights. Like, what is a physical thing that you might want to do? And for others, I talk about, really depends on the person, but talk about what's a talisman or a little thing you could hold that is emblematic of you. Is it something that your child made? Is it a favorite rock? Like, you tell me what it is, but could you literally have it with you or put it in your pocket as like a feeling of something that gives you strength? It doesn't matter what the thing is. It's just interrogating, if I could choose anything that made me feel good, is it my favorite song? Is it a mantra that I'm going to say to myself? What is the shortcut that's going to get me into that place where I feel very much like myself and I feel comfortable to be able to communicate? Because the best communication comes from when we are comfortable. We're more creative, we're more open, we're more probably showing off the best way that we can show up when that's the case.
Yeah. And I mean, that's ultimately what we want and we need as HR leaders move up in seniority, right? And you work more closely with, you're part of the executive team or you're working with them, you're working with board members. You know, I'll say when I started this podcast, one of the pieces of advice I got from our podcast company that has been so helpful was, I don't know if anyone else here does any kind of recording. You think that there's like a TV voice, like you imagine yourself as the narrator of the Kate Mason movie. And so you want to put on this show. And the woman I was working with was like, just imagine your best friend is in front of you. Like if you could literally go get a picture of them and just talk to them as a normal person. And I did that. I actually like went and got a picture of my bestie. I put it up and I pretended I was saying it to her. And she was like, now you sound like you. She's like, thank you. I was like,
What a
oh,
great
okay.
thought. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. But it is interesting how those little things can really help us. And so let's talk about kind of coaching leaders and this idea that you talk a lot about, which is turning your power up and down. Tell me a little bit more about what does that mean and what are some of those habits that you help people navigate?
So one of the things that I think is really important, exactly as you just said, actually, when you think of that, did you say like a newscaster or a presenter, like you have a different persona that you step into?
Yes.
A lot of communication, or that we think about it, is performative. We're trying to do something other than ourselves because we think that's how we do it. And we have, I think, very damaging messages like fake it till you make it that sort of help prop this up, right? Be something other than you in order to get success. And I think that's a profoundly damaging and wrong sort of message to give to people. So I think the idea of summoning your friend is a very beautiful one. A lot of people, what might power me up might power you down. So I would say at the outset that these habits are super, super specific to who we are and can be very different. A good example is I hear a lot is I feel good when, or my power's up when I'm super prepared, right? Or when I'm a subject matter expert, when I'm brought in to speak to something only I know. I feel prepared when I know people in the room or when I'm in a familiar setting. These are really common ones, and there's lots of different answers to those. The powered down ones are often when I'm unprepared, when I've been asked, when I've been put on the spot and I wasn't expecting it, when I don't know people in the room, when I am on stage, when I'm backstage. Like there's a ton of lists. So we might even do a little exercise around that. So everyone, if you can grab a piece of paper or maybe a part of your notebook, I want you to write for me in the last, say, 6 months or a year, where was a conversation or a presentation or an interaction that you had where you felt, oh my gosh, that went so well. I did exactly as I wanted to, or it landed exactly the way I hoped it would. Maybe you went home that night and told your partner about it, or you told a friend, but in that moment, you felt alive with your own, like, yes, this is going exactly as I wanted it. So write down just for yourself the example of when it happened. I know there is one. If you have to go back further than that, go back. And I then want you to write the conditions or what was going on in that moment. So tell me where you were. Tell me, was it something you were wearing? Was it someone else in the room? What was the surrounding environment that helped that moment really shine for you? Describe those conditions that are popping up for you. Because what we're trying to do here is establish a list, and this is what I do with everyone I coach, and it's actually an exercise from the book too. We're trying to find what are the patterns for our own power to be up. Where does it live? How do I tap into it? And you might have guessed this from how I set this up, but I want you to write, when in the last 6 months to a year have I felt my power drip away? When were those moments where I thought, ooh, this is not landing the way I intended? This interaction has not done what I wanted it to do. And specifically here, I also want you to call out those conditions. What was going on that made that feel that way? And ideally, we're going to look at these lists, and I'd really encourage, if this resonates, to keep these alive, put this in a place that you're going to come to again and add to them, right? Start noticing where this is happening for you. When am I feeling like my power is up? When am I feeling like it's not so much there? A great example is one of the clients I'm working with at the moment came to me and she's like, I just realized from my list, I tend to do better when I'm outside of the office, when I'm in a coffee, when I'm going for a walk with someone, when it's a casual surrounding, I tend to really show up well. And the other thing she noticed was that she really loves the first time she meets a prospective client. She's like, there's so much energy. I feel like I'm in my best problem-solving mode. And it's a very sort of sparky, interesting time for her. So we're working together and working, how can she inject more of that type of energy into her everyday? And how maybe does she move some of her everyday to informal settings, for example, is one for her. So I really encourage you to keep these lists alive if they resonate, to start seeing what does that pattern look like for you and how can you bring that energy into more parts of your working life.
Just measuring employee performance is no longer enough. 15.5 helps your HR team take action to maximize performance. With 15.5's performance management platform, you can easily set up review cycles, collect ongoing performance data, track employee goals, and deploy customized campaigns that empower managers to drive growth. Learn more at 15.5.com or click the link in the show notes.
I think it's such a powerful exercise. I think one of the things, even for me, where I feel most powered up is there's a sweet spot between not prepared and over prepared. If I go too hard on preparation, I completely lose my voice, my sense of self, my confidence, the details. I get so overlocked on a script, but I also can't have no preparation. Like that sends me for a tizzy when people ask those off-space questions. So it's navigating this like just enough, just enough that I know it. Could I say it on my own? And I do think when actually I think back to a couple examples too, there is something about sunlight, daylight. When I'm in a room with no natural light, I really struggle to connect with my own thoughts and my own voice more quickly. I don't know what that is, but even now, part of why I'm in a new house and I've been moving my desk around so many times is I got to figure out where the light is in relation to me to literally charge me up.
Yeah, I love that. And again, for those listening, that's not going to resonate with everybody, right? There's going to be lots of different things, and it's about finding the one for you. I love the idea of light charging you up. That's beautiful.
I want to hear more, I guess, from your examples of the coaching that you've done, because you've worked with so many C-suite leaders, which for a lot of folks, again, in HR can be not necessarily an anomaly is the right word, but it's just that constant challenge that every time we work with a new CEO, a new executive, there's only so much we can pull from our past experiences. It's really a lot of I need to understand this person right now, become effective as fast as possible. And like we were talking about earlier, where people get in these situations of friction. I'm with someone who feels this way about HR, who wants nothing to do with me, who has this personality that's not mine. I guess, what are some of the things you wish more HR leaders knew and how they show up in their conversations with executives?
Yeah, I think this is particularly interesting to HR because I think there is that feeling already at the outset, and it's often demonstrated by an executive team that I'm like the add-on to the meeting, or that oh, I guess we better have HR in here, rather than being a very organic and natural part of that exec leadership team. So we're already often going in, and by the way, if that's not your experience, that's wonderful. But if it is your experience, it sometimes can feel like we're already going in on the back foot. Right? We're already having to prove our value or feel like we're having to prove our value. And one of the things I talk about in the book is I think the most valuable thing for any leader, but I'm going to say here, particularly in HR, is to beware of what I call imposing syndrome. So this happens when we're aware of our own likability right? We want to be liked. We want people to have us in the room, but we give away our power in service of being liked. Maybe we feel there's a power imbalance already. Maybe we feel like we're not really welcome in the room. There's lots of different reasons it can happen, but I'll give you a couple of examples of imposing syndrome. So one is we minimize. We say things like, it'll just take 2 seconds. It won't take long, right? No worries if not. We shrink the thing or the ask down because we think, oh, I'll just rush and get through it and then no one will hate me, no one will be upset by it. And what we're doing actually is we're diminishing or undermining the actual ask itself. And by extension, we're diminishing or undermining ourself. If I say to you, Karina, can I grab 2 seconds? You're probably not expecting me for that to be something that's foundationally interesting or useful to the business, right? It sounds like an irritant. And in fact, you're going to be more annoyed when I invariably take longer than 2 seconds because you'll be like, ugh, now I'm late to this thing. And I could instead just say, hey, Karina, I've been thinking a lot about this. I'm going to put an hour in for us next week to catch up on it. I'm going to send you some notes in advance, right? It gives my idea room to breathe. And then by extension, I look like I'm comfortable with what's happening. That's just one instance of that imposing syndrome. We often do it through disclaiming, I'm not an expert, but I'm not an experienced leader, but, right? So we caveat the thing before we've even said it. It's certainly a very, very quick way to undermine both the work that you're doing. So suddenly it looks small, it looks unimportant, it looks like it's an irritant that I have to waste my time on. But then by extension, you have not built trust with me. You are undermining yourself. So I, as your cohort or your colleague, feel like I should do that too. So in many ways, a lot of what I teach is we are training in every interaction, in every communication, we are training people on where to put us in that hierarchy of importance. And I don't mean we have to go in guns blazing, not humble, super aggressive. But we have to be able to assume that our time is valuable, our work is valuable, and that must translate in all of our communications too.
Assuming that our time and our work is valuable, is it just in itself a challenge? I think realistically, like that is, whether you're in HR or in another field, you're a woman, you're a man, you identify anywhere on the spectrum, like that can be a challenge. There's something I think in all of us that holds us back and makes us wonder that. Is you were giving those examples. I think of one that I do that I'm really trying to break. And I actually have been trying to break this since we talked about it a few months ago. But I have a tendency to say, just a thought, my 2 cents here. And it's like, why do I do that? It's like, one, it's obviously my thought because I'm sharing it. But if I say my 2 cents, it sounds like I'm in the peanut gallery, like asking someone to pay attention to me instead of at the table where I'm at, like being asked for my real input and feedback and my expertise, or even saying something like, quick question. Sometimes it is a quick, like if it is actually a quick question, great. If it's not, or if it's like the lead in to something more strategic, I probably shouldn't be using that language, but those are those habits that can really be built up. And yeah, what you just said about training people on where we fall in that hierarchy, I think is a good point of reflection for all of us. So if you think back to the last 2 weeks of interactions you have, where would you put yourself?
Right.
Would you have categorized yourself where you actually fall within that hierarchy, where you're aspiring to go? Or do we unintentionally keep ourselves at a level that actually creates it harder for us to have space, voice, and impact in our businesses?
Yes. I just imagine as well, if someone walked onto this presentation and said like, oh, gosh, I'm not really sure, Karina, or I'm not really an expert, but, or whoops, right? Suddenly you're naturally going to question everything I'm saying. But when we assume that our work is valuable, and I know if I asked all of you, you know the importance of what you're actually doing, not in an egotistical way, but in a foundational, how do I help the company function better? How do I keep the lights on and the wheels moving with very complicated people issues? And you know, if you weren't doing that, the delta of how the company would be, I think that's the inherent value we have to look at. Don't get hung up on like, am I valuable? Because then we have a whole lot of other internal voices. I would love you to know that you are valuable. That is a given. But even if that's hard for you, think about the actual work. think about what you are providing, the scaffolding or the infrastructure that you're building. That can be another way we can appreciate that value and feel good about it.
Yeah, you shared a story with me, Kate, that I would love to hear again here around working with a CEO and thinking about that communication between you and a C-level. It is such an important partnership. And when it works, it is great. And when it doesn't, that can be one of those things where I think about my power down list. What I wrote on my little list was feeling small, which is I think what you alluded to in your example too, of going into a room where you just don't feel like you quite belong. I'd love to just hear, what are some of the myths that make communicating with a CEO harder than it actually has to be?
I think I would start by saying CEOs are people too. And what I mean by that is they're afraid, they're lonely, they're unsure, they're having all the same things that you're worrying about, but they don't have anyone to talk to about it, right? You don't have peers as a CEO. Even your C-suite are not your peers because you're their boss, right? So in a lot of ways, having a little bit of empathy at the outset for like, woof, they are going through a lot here. How can I be of service and make this more helpful? Now, oftentimes, and not always, they're going to want much shorter amounts of detail. They'll double click if they need to know more, but a very quick way to lose their interest, which I learned early in my career when I would report into a CEO, is to tell them everything. I wanted to tell them everything because I've done so much work and I wanted to show the whole page, right? The whole sausage making process. And he would get irritated and be like rolling his eyes and wondering why I was still talking, right? I needed to go in with a strong headline, what we needed to do, and my recommendation. That is how CEOs want you to come. They trust that you know your remit and they want you to come with a strong opinion. You may be coming with a strong opinion and a recommendation, and they may not choose that. They may say something else, but at least you have to put a stake in the ground as to this is where this conversation is having. I've drawn the parameters. This is the specific piece of input I need. So actually, the more we can guide them to the answer in that setup, the easier it is for them to make that decision. They have as well a lot of decision fatigue, right? Their day is full of going yes or no, yes or no. So the easier we can lead that to them to happen, the better. I made a mistake very early in my career of being like, here are all the options, and like big pause, right? And they would look at me like, well, why hasn't she chosen? And I would look at them thinking, well, why aren't they choosing? And of course, I realized in that instance, I think he was like, why isn't she telling me what to do? And I was like, why isn't he telling me what he wants? And there was this really big communicative gap. So coming in at least with an opinion and pointing to a zone on the map is probably the most impactful and effective thing you can do with most CEOs.
Everything you shared brings up so many different memories and real life examples. But I think that was one of the most powerful changes in my communication with C-level executives is moving from the sausage making list to a recommendation. And part of what I needed to do to get there was to let go of the fact that whether or not they took the recommendation was tied to my value and my expertise. Because there was a time that that's what the fear was if I say I recommend this and now you say no, and now I have to defend my opinion, do I look like a fool? But when you are working with someone who has a different opinion than you, like healthy conflict is a good thing. A CEO should ask, why did you recommend this? What is behind it?
Yes.
We know, we usually have that data, but I think past experiences, whether professional, personal, I won't take us down that path, but can lead us to feel like, oh my gosh, if you don't trust the first thing I say, is it because you don't trust me? Maybe I should just not even let you make all the decisions.
Yeah.
Which is so takes away from our power and our voice, like something we really have to shift from. And I don't know, that could certainly, resonate with some and not others, but moving from, this is my recommendation and no qualifiers, take it or leave it. I used to do that too. No big deal if you don't choose it. It's just, this is my recommendation.
Yeah.
And then they can say whatever.
That's a terrible recommendation, or I don't like it. Then you say, I'd love to hear more about that. Can you talk me through your thinking there? Or is there some context you can share here that will inform how I then proceed? Because all you're doing in that thing is, I don't want to look defensive. So I'm just saying, give me more data so I can, and then they may say, oh, well, it's actually because it's the offsite is next week. So that would be too short of a time frame. You go, oh my gosh, that's great intel. I didn't realize. Let me come back to you with an amended schedule that takes that into account, right? So I'm unruffleable. I'm calm. I got my stuff together. Thanks so much. So phrases like, can you talk me through, or can you say more about that? Or I'd love to dig into that with you, are a really nice way to say, let's get in. And with that new information, I will course correct and reconfigure that recommendation. That is not a failure. That is not a bad, I'm stupid moment. That is, I got new information and I configured a response accordingly, which is really what we're all should be in service of doing. We're in industries that move fast, and new information should be a given, right?
Yeah. Now, what would you recommend, Kate? I think a lot of times in service of fast moving environments, people can feel like they need to be less assertive in their communication. Or, we have a question from the group around feeling like they need to keep their communication short because time is limited.
Yeah.
So I want to just hear your reactions to that. Like, what are the tips that you give?
So for a start, I love a short communication. Anyone who lets me out of a meeting early, I'm thrilled, right? I think we all are. You're giving me 10 minutes back, I will take that 10 minutes. So this is not to say you always have to be lengthy by any stretch. But if it is a 15-minute update, book 15 minutes in with someone, right? If it's a 30-minute update, book the 30. But don't say diminishing things like it'll just take 2 seconds, or quick question, or tiny me, right? That doesn't want to be a bother. What the impact of that over time does is it literally minimizes and diminishes the realm that we are seeking to show expertise in. So you wouldn't imagine a CEO or, a head of a company saying like, quick update from me, right? Like a quick earnings call. It's not a quick earnings call. It's
FYI board, 2 minutes.
Yeah, no worries if not, investors, right? We know there's a deliberateness and an intentionality behind those communications that make us take them and the work seriously. And I want us, even if it is a short update, I want us to have that deliberateness and intentionality, because it goes a long way to helping us show up and take pride in what we're actually there to talk about. So by all means, if it's early, and I will often say, oh, Karina, we're before time. I'll let you have 5 minutes back. Thanks again. And everyone's happy. No one is unhappy about a short meeting. Most people are unhappy when your 2-second desk drop by actually requires me to sort of put something down and focus on you.
Exactly. And I think if you're struggling to get someone's time and attention, just bringing that up to them.
Yes.
Kate, you and I need to be able to make a decision on this topic. You haven't been able to find a space in your calendar. It sounds like I should just go ahead without you. Is that like, are we on the same page there?
Yes.
And if the person is like, no, actually, I really need to do this. Sorry, I didn't understand. Well, then great, you've cleared it up. But the more that we go and just say, hey, quick question, I just need you for 10 minutes. I've got to grab you on this or that. To your point, it just diminishes the ask, thereby then diminishing yourself, your power. If you need someone's time and space, you deserve it. If they don't want to give it to you, then they no longer have to be a part of the decision-making process.
Exactly.
And that's okay. That's totally fine.
Feels aggressive or too assertive. If you're sitting hearing this thinking, oh, I could never do that, I want you to think of, your work is very important. You know that what you're about to say is useful to somebody else. So just give it that baseline credibility. Like, that's really all we're asking for. We don't have to ask it in an aggressive way, like, Karina, 1 hour, my office, right? It's very much, you can inject all of the warmth or friendliness or whatever, however you identify with that ask, but just let it take the space it needs. No shrinking required.
Anytime you want to add in that filler, that caveat, just take a breath. Instead of saying it, just hold it for a minute. See what happens when, to your point, Kate, you let your ask fill the space and how people actually come to that instead of you feeling like you have to adjust it. As we, wrap up our conversation here, Kate, too many actually great things to take away. I don't actually really even know where to start. My mind is swirling with all these ideas. And that even though I've known you for a long time, to see everything that you've done come into this book and this advice that you're giving to people, really practical tips, is so meaningful. If you're interested in learning more about 15.5, what we do to help leaders with their authenticity, please connect with us. We'd love to talk to you. We're going to share Kate's LinkedIn, the link to your book, hardcover, audio, softcover. It came out on September 9th. Again, like we were talking about, it doesn't matter who you are, how you identify, but we deserve the space that we have earned through our expertise, through our existence, through us being in our jobs, through the work that we're doing. You don't have to ask for permission. Think about Kate's lovely voice and her telling you, you've got this, you can do it, the next time you're feeling a little bit scared or a little bit timid. Because the more we take one step, we move closer to our power up, further away from our power downs. I think we will all be able to find out that we actually have so much power inside of us that we've been blocking. And now it's time to unlock it and give it out to the world.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Kate, for being here with us. Thank you, everyone. Wonderful to see you all, and can't wait for our next session together.
The performance review is dead. We're sure you've heard that one before. But is it true? Not necessarily. There's a good chance that your performance review could just use a little makeover. Luckily, 15.5 has crafted a playbook to help. In it, you'll find a thorough review of academic and industry research from a survey of over 1,000 strategic HR leaders, distilled into 5 principles to keep in mind as you design or improve your review process. Every organization has different goals and context to consider when it's designing reviews. This playbook walks through decisions, options, and trade-offs you'll encounter as you design your review process and share best practices. We'll drop a link in the show notes for you to check out.